Hi, my name is Nicole, and it's been a long time since I've posted anything on this channel. But it's been one of my New Year's resolutions to start posting more. But the thing is I kept thinking, like, man, I don't do anything that's worth watching, which I know is not true. But yeah, I've had anxiety about, like, posting things and being present online and all of that. This is the first time that I'm ever doing something like this, so I don't know what setup I want to have. I'm troubleshooting everything. Like, this whole thing on this side is very big and awkward, but it's what I've got right now. So we're gonna roll with it, and it's gonna be what it's gonna be. I realized that the whole thing was in my face, and it was better to move it. Yeah, so I have decided that I'm going to start a series where I read chapters from my grandma's memoir, Finding Home. This is her, Miss Pamela Daniels. She wrote this a long time ago. I say a long time ago, but it was 2011. And when it came out, I was too little to really understand what it was, and far too little to read it and comprehend anything that was in there. And then as I got older, it just felt like this big endeavor, and I don't think I was ready to face reading it, especially once she got older and was coming to the end of her life. So now it's been a few years since she has passed, and I would like to finally read this book, and I thought that it might be nice if I read it on camera for everyone. Yeah, I don't know who this is for. If it's just for my family to be able to listen to the book, that would be nice. Or if there's anyone on the internet that wants to listen to this random lady's life, I think she was pretty cool. And I hope that you enjoy. I'm sitting here in my apartment, surrounded by furniture that I inherited from her. And this cat, who was not her cat. This was my step-grandpa's cat. But I just inherited her too, because Mercer has gone into memory care, sadly. But this is Noodle. She's an old lady cat. She'll be 13 in May. And I love her. I am obsessed with her. But anytime I sit on this couch, she comes and joins me. So she's my little reading buddy today. Yeah. So I think each video will probably be a chapter or two. The first 2 chapters don't seem terribly long. And they go together because it's about her parents, my great-grandparents. I know I will cry. So please expect that in this series I shall be crying. And before I start reading, there is a disclaimer or a trigger warning after reading the first 2 chapters. Please don't judge any wording or stereotypical language that my grandma says. Also, there is talk of an incident with a gun, so if you are super sensitive to that, I will put a little timestamp right here on the video so that you can be aware and skip if you need to. But yeah, let's get started. I will start off by reading she signed the book for me. And I wish at the time I had asked her what it said, because she was dealing with her cancer at this time, and it was hard for her to write. So, for context, I'm a singer. Oh, sorry, Mommy. And so that's why it says what it says. If you're interested in looking at any of my singing videos or listening to my music, I can link that below, if you don't know who I am. and you're just a random stranger finding this video. So it says, to lovely Nicole, whose voice will fill the world. I'll always love you. Nana. I'm already tearing up. It's too early to do that. Okay. So I will read the dedications and then keep going. I'm not supposed to cry. Here goes. With loving appreciation of Susan Wright, whose encouragement and wise editing helped me get the book off the ground, to my cousin Ruth Cunningham, whose genealogical research, photos, and fine memory helped me to get things straight, and to Claire Durst, whose clever formatting helped fit together the pictures and the text. Mother always said that I should write about what I know, so this is what I've done. This book is a celebration of the people I have loved and the places I have called home. I'm not including everything, but what I have written is the truth as I remember it. For Mom and Dad and Chuck, my grandfather. For the good times. I have loved many houses. I didn't want to give them up, to see places I longed for become spaces where I was no longer wanted. But new shapes reform to meet old needs. The pleasures of home are a movable feast, and I have fed my hungry heart at many tables. Chapter 1. Dell. My mother, Marjorie Dell Scott, was a born storyteller. I used to love hearing about her childhood in the Texas Panhandle and later in Napa, California. The earliest story she told goes back to the Civil War era, to my great-grandparents in Kentucky. Mary Jeanette was 17 in 1868 when she ran off and married 27-year-old Isaac D. Doughty. Within the year, they had a baby daughter who was named Mary Lee. Unfortunately, Isaac had been a prisoner in 2 Union prisons before the Civil War and couldn't stand to be confined. He left the marriage and for the rest of his life would not travel in the confinement of a vehicle. That meant that he walked everywhere, even across the country to see his daughter. Relatives would insist on putting him on a train, but he would get off at the next stop. Left alone, Mary Jeanette sent young Mary Lee to live with her uncle, Van Buren Doughty, a preacher. Mary Lee used to speak lovingly of Uncle Vanny and that beautiful Kentucky hills where they lived. When she got older, Mary Lee was sent to Texas to stay with the other relatives. Her mother married again and never reclaimed her daughter, so Mary Lee grew up with the knowledge that she had been abandoned by both of her parents. One day, a man named Tolbert Ennis Scott passed by a tiny young woman standing at the garden gate and said, "That's the woman I'm going to marry." He and Mary Lee were married in 1890 when they were both in their early 20s. They started ranching in the Panhandle region of Texas, which was experiencing the last days of the big cattle drives on the Great Western Trail. They moved several times around the area and wound up in Vernon, near the Wagoner Ranch, said to be the largest ranch in Texas under one fence. The story of Tolbert Ines and Mary Lee, however, was not the story of the Grand Ranch. They began on a small, rented cotton spread, working hard to keep it going. During the 25 years of the marriage, Mary Lee bore 6 sons and 4 daughters. 8 of the children survived infancy. Of those, my mother Dell, born in 1908, was the youngest. By then, the oldest of her brothers had grown up and no longer lived at home. Mary Lee was just under 5 feet tall, but she could handle the requirements of life on a ranch. My mother used to tell how my grandmother would kill a chicken by putting her small hands around its neck and giving a sharp twist. Tolbert and Mary Lee's second child was Annie Lee, an adored little girl who died at the age of 18 months and was buried in 1894 in Cook County, Texas. When the family moved to Vernon, Texas, they brought her little body with them and reburied her there. The tombstone has a small white dove on it and reads, "Weep not, Papa, and Mama for me, for I am waiting in heaven for thee. Mary Lee once told my mother, after that baby died, Dell, I never gave my heart away completely until you. When Dell was a toddler, she had a serious mishap. She put her hand on the stove and badly burned the little finger on her right hand. As it healed, the little finger curled up and shriveled. It stayed that way for the rest of her life, but Dell never seemed particularly bothered by it. When Dell was about 4, the last of Mary Lee's 10 babies, a little girl named Ruth died shortly after birth. Dell remembered being shown the baby, who was dressed all in white and looked like a pale little doll. After that, she never saw the baby again, and later wondered if she had been buried under the house, since that's where they buried one of their dogs. By all accounts, Tolbert Ennis Scott was an agreeable, hard-working man. My cousin Ruth remembers being told that he was full of fun and was a great cook who made great biscuits. But Dell was always a little afraid of her father's temper. Although he never turned his temper on her, she was frightened by his anger at her rascally brothers. She retained a fear of anger all her life, a factor, I suspect, in marrying my gentle, restrained father. She once told me that she herself had a very bad temper, but I never saw it. In those days before radio and television, people used to make their own entertainment. Dell remembered that she would recite maudlin poems with great seriousness to the amusement of the rest of the family. One of the poems was a tearjerker about a little girl who cleaned her dog with gasoline. You can imagine the rest of the story. Dell was the family pet to the older family members. But 2 of her brothers, who were just a few years older than she, loved to play tricks on her. Dell, look up the sleeve of this jacket if you want to see stars. Come on, you want to see stars, don't you? Tentatively, she would peer up the sleeve, and they would pour water down the sleeve. Her brothers placed 2 chairs a foot or so apart, spread a sheet between the chairs over the space between them, and then sat on the 2 chairs. Dell, you may come and meet the King of Zanzibar. Kneel to the King of Zanzibar. Now, you may sit with the King of Zanzibar. As she sat on the sheet, spread between the 2 chairs, they stood up, tumbling her to the floor. She rode a little black pony to school, following her brothers who were also riding ponies. Don't you let Dell race on that pony, admonished her mother. Once, around the bend, the boys gave the pony a slap, and away she went. Dell had a pet pig named Creedy, who would follow her around, and sometimes she would try to ride him. One morning, one of her brothers whispered in her ear, They're killing Creedy! Dell raced to the slaughterhouse, where she found Creedy dead on the ground. Broken-hearted, she threw herself on Creedy and cried bitter tears. When our daughter Cindy was in junior high, she interviewed my mother about her childhood for a classroom assignment. Cindy wrote, On their ranch, they had no electricity, running water, or heat. There was a stove in most of the rooms. Wheeler had no 5-cent stores, no cars, no movies, no trains, nor radios, because they hadn't been invented. Most people got their local news by listening in on the telephone party lines. They really didn't need much money because they grew most of their food. In the summer, they had lots of juicy fruits to eat. Since Dell was the youngest, she didn't have to do much work at all. For her, it was an advantage to be the youngest. When she was about 4 years old, she saw her first train, which frightened her. When she was old enough to read, Dell saw her first movie, a silent film. She recounted the plot of one drama to her family. She explained to them that the heroine in the film had been compromised. She also saw a film where a poor, noble mother worked all her life to provide for her ungrateful children, only to be sent in the end over the hill to the poor house. I think the image of the old woman trudging over that hill remained with my mother in all her life because she always had a fear of ending up in a nursing home. When Dell was about 4, the family decided to sell their small ranch and move to another slightly better one. Dell, in later years, used to write little snippets about her early years. It was a cold, icy morning. I heard Mama's urgent but gentle voice saying, "Wake up, Dell. Papa has the wagon all packed and we are all ready to strut." I knew this was the day we were beginning the long ride to the small ranch Papa had recently bought. It had land he was excited about, and a small house. Papa kept assuring Mama that as soon as we got settled, he would build her a larger house that she would like. I knew Papa could do anything. Papa had filled the bottom of the wagon with things we would need at once. A big mattress was put on top of it all. This was the bivouac of my rollicking older brothers. I was happy to be riding in the front of the wagon between Mama and Papa, who held me closely with strong, loving arms. The Scotts had packed up into something that sounds very much like a covered wagon, pulled by 4 horses. At the same time, far away in California, Dell's future husband was enjoying the novelty of comforts of his family's Model T. I recall my father teasing Mother about her early days riding in a covered wagon. On their journey, Dell had a true frontier adventure. It was early winter, and a day or so into their journey, a snowstorm began to blow. Dell remembered the ominous feeling that something bad was going to happen. It would be very dangerous to be snowed in on the prairie. Her parents spotted a farm off in the distance and made for it, arriving just before the full force of the storm. Life could be lonely on a little farm, and her family was welcomed into the household, where they stayed for several months. They celebrated Christmas together and made small gifts for each other. In 1915, when Dell was about 6 years old, her father suddenly died of appendicitis. He was 45 years old. Dell remembered her bewilderment over his death. She wasn't sure how to behave. She was pretty sure she was supposed to cry, but mostly she felt confused. On his deathbed, Tolbert had made Rosalind, the eldest daughter, promise to take care of her mother and the younger children. Rosalind had wanted to finish high school and continue her education, but Tolbert told her she had done enough schooling. Dell remembered her father telling the boys to listen to Roxy and do what she says. Rosalind was about 15 years older than Dell, and in many ways became her mother. "My real mother seemed like a very sweet old lady," said Dell. The photos from that era tend to be so serious, and I had never thought of Dell's mother as having a sense of humor. But my cousin Ruth remembers that she retained a good sense of humor all her life. Around 1917, when Dell was about 9, the family that was still at home decided to move away from the Panhandle. "That wind in Texas liked to dried me out and blew me away," said Mary Lee. One of the boys had been in the army and had seen the Napa Valley. He thought his mother would like the gentler climate. Dell spent the rest of her school years in Napa. In those days, Napa was a very quiet little town, and Dell and her mother settled comfortably into a small house. They received a lot of support from other family members. Dell's rascally older brothers had grown up to be fine men and had left the household, but continued to help out financially. As she grew older, Dell worked part-time here and there to help make ends meet. On December 27th, 1917, Dell's sister, Rosalind, met Lewis Coward. On December 28th, he proposed to her. On December 29th, they were married. It was the time of World War I, and Lewis soon went off to fight in France. When he returned, he and Rosalind decided to settle in Napa to be near her mother. They soon had their first child, my cousin Ruth, but Rosalind continued to help parent Dell. Years later, when I was in college, I visited Rosalind, a particularly lovely person. She still lived in Napa Valley, and I remarked that the town was very beautiful, nestled between the mountains. When I was young, Those mountains seemed to press in and trap me out, she said. Things turned out well for Rosalind, though. Although she never left the Napa Valley, she persevered in her education, earning her teaching credential, taught school, and became the county treasurer. Her husband, Lewis Coward, was a good man, and they had 3 beautiful daughters and a handsome son. Dell told Cindy about life in Napa Valley. It must have seemed pretty idyllic. Cindy wrote, "It was a sleepy town, with a population under 10,000, but to her it seemed giant. Their town was exactly the opposite of their ranch. It had electricity, small furnaces, movies, and lots of cars. The people even sounded different." Dell seems to have had a fun-filled, wholesome life in Napa. The last time I saw her before she died, she was very forgetful about her current life, but she took me through her high school yearbook and told me stories about each student. She had a best friend named Rachel, who looked like the person Dell always wished to be. She was tallish, slender, and pale-skinned, with long, dark, curly hair which she pulled back from her face. She danced, a dancer with a dancer's looks. Dell was small and rosy-faced, with perfect teeth and fine, light auburn hair. Somehow, she never felt particularly attractive. She used to joke that she would never have plastic surgery because she has nothing to go back to. Once, when I pointed out to her that she had a very nice petite figure and perfect skin, she sighed and replied, "I just never liked the type." There is a picture of Dell and her brother Jack when she was about 11. Dell is slightly taller than Jack, and her hair seems to be long and pulled back from her smiling face. Jack looks pretty spiffy, but Dell is wearing some sort of shapeless dark dress. Judging from her pictures, by the time she was a teen, she had considerably improved her image. The first thing she did was to cut her hair short in a flapper cut. Her family thought of flappers as girls who hung out in speakeasies, where illegal liquor was served, so her family wasn't sure they approved. When her brother Jack saw her hair, he said, "Dell, I didn't think you were the sort of person to do a thing like that." He came around, though, and later conceded that it looked good on Dell. As the 20s progressed, the flapper look became mainstream fashion. Like many of the girls at the time, Dell would wrap bandages around her chest to achieve the appropriate, boyish look. I once asked Mother about the vineyards in Napa, and she pointed out that it was the time of Prohibition, and the vineyards were closed. Dell and her friends used to give recitals at church. She would give the readings, her friend Marjorie played the piano, and Rachel performed ballet. One of her good high school friends, Robert Walton, who later became a radio announcer, would write plays and cast Dell in all of them. "Dell, in this play, you are a gypsy." By all reports, Dell was charming, funny, and witty. At her memorial gathering, Ty said that she was more Woody Allen than Gracie Allen. This must have started at an early age, because Robert would say to her, "Dell, make me laugh." And she did. Dell was the first in her family to finish college, and she loved the College of the Pacific. Although her brother Hub had been helping financially, Dell was shocked at the end of her freshman year to learn that there wasn't enough money for her to return the following year. She took a year off, worked and saved, and was back again as a sophomore the following year. Mother had a sweet boyfriend, Al, who couldn't do enough for her. "Do you like that? I'll buy it for you." He planned a birthday for her, dinner out, presents, everything thoughtfully planned. Mother said that she knew she wasn't going to marry him and sent him away after that. Something she always felt sad about. I believe he married someone else and was killed in World War II while still a young man. It was in a college drama production that she met Jay, a tall, quiet, only child, a serious student, a campus leader, but 2.5 years younger than she, although she didn't know it at the time. He had never met anyone like Dell. All right, now I'm about to start the second chapter. I wasn't sure if I was going to continue, but this next chapter is actually very short. Chapter 2. Jay. My father, J. Henry Smith, was in every sense of the word that old-fashioned thing known as a gentleman. He was quietly courtly in his treatment of women. He always walked on the outside when he went down the street, rose when women came in the room, that sort of thing. He was also a very gentle person. Jay's father, James Henry Smith, grew up on a farm in Idaho. During the winter, he said that everyone used to gather at his family's house, since they had a big front parlor. Everyone would bring food, and they would entertain themselves singing and dancing. James' mother played the viola, and he played a violin, which his father had made for him. Everyone brought food, and when they got tired, they would find a place to sleep. The parties went on for days. James graduated from the Colorado School of Mines and had had some success in real estate. He married a very pretty girl named Minnie Ethel Coffin, whom everyone called Billy. We have many photos of her at weddings and other events in her beautiful long gowns. In some photos, she was wearing one of the large flowered hats that were in fashion. Very becoming. Shortly after Jay's parents married, James came down with a typhoid fever. In those days, there wasn't much a doctor could do for you, and people used to wait for the crisis, after which a person either lived or died. Billy must have feared that she was going to lose her young husband before their marriage had really begun. James was sick for several months, and his doctor said that he must have been strong as a horse to have survived. The rest of his life, he was quite healthy and lived into his 90s. Jay was an only child and was born in 1911 in Spokane, Washington, but the family soon moved to Stockton, California, a small city located on the San Joaquin River, about 90 miles inland from San Francisco Bay. Because it has a deep navigable channel, Stockton was a major shipping point for the area. During the gold rush, Stockton provided supplies to gold miners, and later settlers took advantage of Stockton's rich prairies and sunny climate to grow fruit and other agricultural products. By the time that Jay was born, Stockton was already a thriving city. Jay was born just as his uncle Lorenzo and uncle Leviticus died, so Jay was christened Lorenzo Levi Smith, a name he hated. When he was 11, he convinced his parents to let him legally change his name, and he chose Jay and Henry after his father, pretty much the simplest name possible. Photos of that era are so solemn, a result, I think, of having to hold a pose while the photographer's camera flashed. I have a photo that I treasure, though. It is very blurred, not really reproducible, but you can just make out Billy with infant Jay in her arms, bending over with laughter, with a laughing James close behind her. Jay was an only child. He grew up in a very quiet household. When he was in high school, his mother was often sick. She may have had TB, and Jay used to carry her upstairs to bed. My mother thought that was very romantic, but I told her he was probably thrilled to find a rosy-faced, healthy girl like her. I have a photo of James and Billy with little Jay dressed in white leaning against them. It all looks very romantic. A European in a shop where I was having the picture framed remarked, "Aristocrats, yes?" Well, no. Californians, really. Jay didn't talk a lot about his childhood, but one story he told me once gave me pause. He was about 9 years old, and he and his mother were visiting another mother and her boy. The boy took Jay upstairs to show him something exciting. He brought out his father's gun. Laughing, the boy pointed it at Jay and pulled the trigger. Click. Then he pointed it at the wall and pulled the trigger. Bang! The terrified mothers dashed upstairs. If something had gone a little differently, most of my family wouldn't be here today. Jay was a natural student and leader. His mother kept a scrapbook of clippings about him in the local papers. I remember seeing that scrapbook as a girl and consciously emulating him in high school. Because he was tall and an excellent student. He skipped 2 grades, a practice he would never support for his kids. It probably amplified his shyness. Once he was about 15, he worked up the courage to invite a girl to a school dance. When he showed up at her house, all spiffed up with flowers in his hand, his parents invited him into the parlor to visit. In the course of conversation, he realized that something was very wrong. It dawned on him that he was a day early. Deeply mortified, Jay quietly took his leave. The girl's parents were very impressed that he had come by to introduce himself before taking their daughter out, but Jay was humiliated. He went home and cried. Jay's father lost heavily in the Depression, and so Jay went off to the College of the Pacific in Stockton, known as the University of the Pacific, instead of Stanford, as had been planned. He was 16 years old and very shy, but he threw himself into student government and theatrics. There was an exceptional drama professor at the school named Marcus Brown. Marcus Brown said of Jay that he was the quickest memorizer he had encountered. He described Jay as the only actor he knew who could get a part in the afternoon and would know it by dinner. Our daughter Cindy, his grandchild, seems to have inherited that talent. Because Jay was tall and a good, intelligent actor, Marcus often cast him as lead, notably in the role of Dr. Faustus in a modern 30s-style version of Faust. Brown seemed to have staged things beautifully. We have some photos of his projections of Dr. Faustus. In one photo, the stage is dark. There is an illuminated angel on the left, and Jay stands in the middle with a halo of light around his head. Of course, the best thing that happened to Jay was that he met Dell in one of the productions. According to my cousin Ruth, she was often cast as the leading lady. Dell was more modest about her roles. Jay was the lead, and I was, as usual, the girl selling oranges. I believe Dell was the only girlfriend he ever had. He told Dell later that he had never had as much fun as he did on his first date with her. All right. I like that last part. Well, I'm going to continue going on with this book, and I hope that you follow along, and I hope that you enjoyed listening to some of what my Nana has written about. So, thank you, and until the next video.